This mystery story begins in a garden where a girl was picking corn. She had been doing this for quite some time now, and so she was sore all over. She thought she was falling apart as she walked. Then she shouted to her employer that it was the last box, but the man turned to Celia, the girl's name. The man told her to stop talking like an ancient old lady already, for she was still young. Celia apologized to him and told him that she had simply lived with her grandmother too long. I thought I'd love to gag him with corn. After that, Celia said that the work was already finished, so she would go. But she didn't. Her employer asked if she thought that if she had completed a simple case, she could leave. He shouldn't have been so welcoming to this stranger. It had been 7 years since Celia had come to this place. It's very difficult for her to adapt to the flat climate. While she was working, she got burned all over. Celia used to live in Bentrak, a village up north in that barren land. The blizzard ceased exclusively in the summer, and it was also on the day Celia was 13 years old. The girl was walking down the street and thought it was very difficult to get food. But she couldn't go back without it, or her grandmother would be upset. Celia's parents were killed in an avalanche. This happens quite often in that area because the village is surrounded by an impassable mountain range. The grandmother raised the girl alone, but suddenly fell ill in the middle of winter. As Celia walked through the forest, she thought about how her knees were so sore and achy. There was nothing to eat, and there was only snow around. But then suddenly, looking around, the girl saw some kind of glow nearby. She took a closer look and immediately rushed to that spot. Celia couldn't believe her luck. She thought she was still asleep. The girl was quickly near the glow and realized that it was indeed a fruit. Celia grabbed it and ran toward the house, thinking she should take it to her grandmother sooner rather than later. But then suddenly she stopped and wondered if she should take a bite first. Celia took a bite of the top of the fruit after all, and wondered if she had eaten too much since there was only half of it left. But then suddenly, dwelling a little longer, the girl felt a kind of disgusting taste. She thought maybe it was spoiled, but there was no way Celia could spit out the food after all. She had had such a hard time finding it. So the girl continued to chew the fruit. After that, she tried to swallow it, but Celia was unable to do so. Then she thought she would have to spit it out after all. And at that moment, wherein the point, someone came up and turned to her, startled. Celia swallowed the piece she had bitten off. A guy came closer to her and asked if she even realized what she'd done. Celia, still feeling the horrible taste in her mouth from the fruit, turned and saw him. It was the first time the girl had ever seen such a beautiful man. Celia kept looking at him and thought he was like some kind of sculpture. But then, after I got over the euphoria, I noticed he was naked. Celia was a little embarrassed by this and thought, maybe he's some kind of crazy even though he's handsome. He's going to die like this, right? The guy turned to her again and asked her, what did she eat, that pointing to the fruit the girl was holding in her hands? Celia said no, it wasn't her. But the guy resented it and told her not to lie. Why? Then she had mugs on her lips from him. Celia at that moment threw the fruit out of her hands and covered her mouth with her hands to avoid seeing those crumbs. The guy came closer to her, grabbed her by her clothes and said, did his essence get to some man? Celia apologized in a frightened voice, but the guy kept shouting and asked yes how she even dared to touch her. The girl made a terrible mistake. Celia at this point thought that she didn't do it on purpose, she didn't know. But the guy kept yelling, and said that once he'd left her for a while, everything had gone wrong. But then he added that he had no choice but to eat her heart in return. Celia was shocked, and the guy explained that the essence is completely absorbed into the human heart in 10 years. He said that, and in the meantime he would cut off her arm and leg, then hang her from a tree so she wouldn't escape. Celia didn't know what he was even talking about. At that moment he grabbed the girl's hand and said that perhaps he would start with her hands. Celia was frightened and shouted for him to stop, and she thought to herself that God should help her somehow. At least this time, let him send this psychopath to hell. And at that moment the guy let go of the girl and fell down. Celia couldn't believe her happiness. At that moment she thought it had worked. But then suddenly, looking at the guy, she realized that it hadn't, and he started to get up. Celia continued to look at him. At this point, the guy thought he had no time at all and picked up the fruit that was lying on the snow. He had nothing else to do, so he ate the half that was left, thinking that even though it was only half, she would help him. And at that moment his body began to glow brightly, and then the guy who was lying on the snow recently turned into a huge golden dragon. He turned to the girl who was looking at him with surprised eyes and said she was lucky he wasn't going to kill her right now. but the guy said in 10 years he'll take his essence back. He'll tear off her arms and legs and then swallow her heart. He said he'll find her. Even she's out there shining, so she might as well not try to hide. At that moment, the adult Celia heard someone's voice calling her name, and she woke up from her memories. When she looked in front of her, she saw a girl she recognized as Rowena. The girl asked what she was thinking about and couldn't even get through to her. Celia smiled and said it was about nothing and asked, "What is it about?" Figured it was her past history now. She doesn't know. Maybe she was so hungry then that she even started hallucinating, so she saw this guy then. Ruhina said that she had overheard the soldiers talking and had heard that a very important man was on his way to them. Celia asked, "Why them?" Rowena said that she had heard about something being stolen from him sometime long ago. He said he had waited 10 whole years to get it back. Celia asked with a smile, but inwardly with fear, "Is it really 10 years?" Rowena said that some Northmen hid the thing and then just took it and fled to the plains. Celia said that was an interesting enough story. Rowena suddenly exclaimed, saying that she remembered his name and called him Calix. The girl said that was exactly what he said. At that moment, Celia remembered what that dragon had told her last. He had ordered her to make sure she remembered his name until then, and his name was Calix, of course. The girl was very frightened when she heard this, and asked, "Is she serious?" After all, Celia had hoped to the last minute that it was just a hallucination, and not real. At that moment, Celia thought it was a question that couldn't be. She doesn't know how that psychotic dragon got as far as the plains. Rowena saw the girl's frightened face and asked if she was all right, because she didn't look so good. Maybe she was sick? But Celia realized that she couldn't just stand there. She had to do something right away. So she walked over to her friend and asked if they had any more paint, right? Rowena said yes and asked why she did, but the girl ignored her questions and asked, "Will it work for her hair?" Rowena thought for a moment, but then said that it would. But she only had one color left for her hair, and it was a little off the standard. Celia said in a panic that she didn't care about the answer, so just let her give it to him quickly. The girl got down on her knees. Rowena was of course surprised, but then she smiled at the girl and told her to follow her. Skin as white as if it were snow, black hair and cornflower eyes. This is the kind of appearance that is characteristic of Northerners. Celia realized that this was probably how Calix remembered her, so she needed to do something about it immediately. After a while, the girls came to the storeroom. Rowena looked around a bit and said that, and added that one girl wouldn't be able to handle it, so she would help. After that, she told Celia to tilt her head. After a few hours, the girls finally finished. Rowena asked if Celia liked the result. The girl was just looking in the mirror. Her hair had gone from dark to bright green. Rowena said she looked like a small tree. Celia was furious. She asked her friend again, did she really only have green color left? At this point, she tried to calm down, thinking that it was no big deal. She needed to think positively. At least now no one would recognize her as a Northerner. After that, Celia went back to her work. She was already somewhere in shape and stood in front of her master, thinking everything was fine. But when the man saw her, he asked what it was with her hair. It was like she had moss on her head. The man asked, "Couldn't you have dressed up better on a day like this? Why did you have to dye your hair that color?" But Celia thought it was no big deal. There's a big upside to this situation, and that is that Calix definitely won't recognize her. At that moment, the butler walked in and addressed Mr. Chamberlain, telling him that Calix had just arrived. The man immediately turned to the maids and told them all to assemble and take their seats. In order to greet Calix, the girls have to stand at his sides and throw flowers at his feet. Except there was one very unpleasant problem for Celia, namely that she's the first in the line. The girl thought, he doesn't have to kill her in the middle of the carpet. After that, all the ladies went outside, loud music was playing, everyone was ready to greet the distinguished guest. Celia took her seat and thought that she shouldn't worry. There was no way he would recognize her with that hair color. Everyone was bustling about, but the girl stood still, and a few minutes later, he, that long-awaited guest, walked in. Calix was with his assistant. Celia, when she looked at him, thought he was shining like the sun, and as beautiful as he was then. All the maids started scattering petals, and the girl just stood there looking at him. At that moment, Celia remembered his words that in 10 years he would find and eat her heart. The girl was scared. As he passed by, Calix looked at her carefully. At that moment, the girl thought, Did he really recognize her? Celia, remembering her duty, started to pick up a petal to throw, but then she suddenly heard his voice. Calix said that if she threw a single petal at him, he would rip her arms off. He wouldn't even look at her. Walking a little further, he told someone to get it all out of his sight. All the maids immediately started whispering and stopped throwing petals. As Calix walked past, Celia fell to the floor. She thought she was going to die right here and now. The maids began to whisper. One of them said he had a terrible temper, but his looks were beautiful. The other agreed and said that his beauty almost made her fall off her feet. Celia soothed herself with the thoughts that it was no big deal and it was all over now. But at that moment the owner came out to them and asked, "What are they standing here for? Who's going to serve the guests?" Their employers told them to be quick because this guest didn't like to wait. Celia was shocked when she heard that. But she had no choice, so she and the rest of the maids came to the room where Calix and his assistant and their master were sitting. The chamberlain asked his guest, "What is the purpose of his visit?" Calix replied in a cold voice that it was a man. The man who took his possessions and just ran away. Calix said when he found him, he'd tear him apart. The chamberlain was surprised and asked, "Does he really mean to say that this man is on his property?" Calix replied that he wasn't sure yet and asked, "Are all of their villagers currently in the manor?" He clarified in a body, except for those running his errands. The chamberlain became nervous. He asked him to call them into the room, or maybe he would describe the culprit to him in detail. Calix smiled and said he didn't need to. Celia was very surprised, and the boy continued and said that he would catch his own prey. The chamberlain said that yes, how could that man dare to steal from him? He had lost his fear. Celia was in a panic, and Calix said he wanted to find him himself because he wanted to kill him. The chamberlain said he could stay at the manor while he was busy looking for him. The man said he was sure Calix would get to him quickly and asked, "Can he offer their guest lunch?" Celia tried to reassure herself, thinking that he probably didn't recognize her after all. She didn't know how this would turn out. The chamberlain said that after the meal, Calix has a chance to look around the grounds. While the men continued their conversation, the girls went out the door to prepare dinner. And so after a while, everyone was already gathered in the banquet hall. And when Celia brought out one of the dishes, commercial that it was, a potato pie for real recipe. After all the dishes were on the table, they began their meal. Celia stood behind Calix and stared at his back. The man, sensing her gaze, turned and asked, "Why is she staring at me like that?" Celia was very frightened and wondered if she had given herself up. The girl, trembling, said that it had been a long time since they had had such an honored guest, and that she was just nervous, and she's just nervous. Calix interrupted her and said that she wasn't just curious, she was watching him closely. Celia was even more frightened. She was about to make some excuse, but the guest got up from the table and came closer to her, telling her to speak quickly. Celia was scared, but she knew she couldn't relax. She needed to think of something immediately, but she didn't answer anything. Then Calix looked at her and asked why she was silent. He had asked her a question, hadn't he? The girl didn't understand why he was looking at her like that. Calix moved even closer to the girl. Celia's only thought was that she needed absolutely any excuse, but as soon as possible, even the most ridiculous one, for him to stop staring at her. Celia thought at this moment that he looked so marvelous. She had even staggered when she first saw him so beautiful, as if he were a sculpture. Then suddenly she thought of it finally, when the man already wanted to say something to her. Celia shouted out to the whole room that she had fallen in love with him at first sight. Everyone present was shocked. At this moment, Celia slowly began to realize that she had said it out loud. She had just thought it. She was very embarrassed. She didn't understand how she could even think of such a thing. Calix, breaking the silence, asked what it was she had just said. The girl whispered that she loved him. Celia didn't understand why she'd come up with that particular thing, and she needed to fix it sooner, rather than later. When she said that she was very, very powerful, but when I saw his face, I realized that wasn't it. And then I started thinking of something else to say. Celia said that she got up early, could bathe in cold water, and her hair didn't fall out. She doesn't have to take care of her parents, and she has no children. She's also single. She's also good at making snowmen. She eats anything, and she can also run very fast. At this point, the girl thought she was backing herself into a corner. Celia ended by saying that she was also a great massage therapist. But at that moment, Calix interrupted her and asked, "What's in it for him? Does he want to marry her?" Celia at this point thought anything but that. He didn't mean it, did he? Then suddenly the girl thought that if she said no after such a confession, he would say she was crazy and order her killed. Celia realized that wasn't an option at all. Then she lowered her head and said in a quiet voice that yes, she wanted to marry him. Calix smiled and said that there was no harm in dreaming after all. After that, he started walking back to his seat. Celia saw this and sighed in relief. She thought she'd gotten out of it, and this time she wouldn't be hurt. The girl turned to her friend Rowena, who was barely trying to contain her laughter. She thought to herself not to make her laugh in any way because of this. At this point, Calix said he wanted to rest and asked if his bedroom had been prepared for him yet. The chamberlain immediately went to him and said that yes, they would carefully prepare his room for him and call the best servants. He also added that if Calix liked any of the girls, let him say, but the man interrupted him and said that he was not satisfied with either of them. Then he pointed his finger at Celia and said he was choosing her. Celia was shocked. She asked what he meant by that. Calix said that he does. He chooses her, and called the girl a caterpillar. Celia didn't understand what was even going on or why he was calling her a caterpillar. She was in shock. 10 years ago in the north, Calix was walking through the snow and thought his last transformation was finally upon him. Every 100 years dragons change their appearance, and this is what happens 6 times. It is only at the last of these times that a dragon becomes an adult. Calix is the golden dragon, which is the most famous of the species. Some say that the golden dragon once fell in love with a goddess and she took him to heaven. Calix, on the other hand, thought he was an idiot, because he was too busy narcissizing himself. He didn't understand why he needed someone else. It was a mystery to Calix how the golden dragon could have acted foolishly there. But then suddenly he felt someone's gaze, and when he looked up, he saw Roman's black dragon. Calix asked him why he was looking at him like that. Roman apologized and said that he just wanted to make sure that Calix completed his transformation safely. Calix turned around and started walking, saying that only Roman could worry about such things. The black dragon was indignant and said that it just so happens that the master makes too many mistakes. On the 5th time, he did not take the essence and slept for 10 whole years. Calix once founded a country in the human world, and then abandoned it to its fate, then foolishly accepted flowers from the scarlet dragoness and 2 failed to get married. Calix, after listening to him, said that he was just exaggerating. Roman thought at that moment that of course he thought that. He wasn't the one who had to deal with all these problems already. Then he said that they would meet at this place in exactly 10 years and bowed to him. Then he disappeared. Calix didn't say a word to him, only thinking that finally this nerd was gone, and now he could finally absorb his essence. But when he looked at the egg, he remembered that he also needed the holy stone. Then he put his egg on the snow and said that he would be back soon, so let it lie there for a while. After that he disappeared too. In fact, the essence contains the magical power of the dragon. It is the key to existence and the source of power. A dragon that has lost the essence is no different from an ordinary lizard. Therefore, it is valued as the apple of the eye. It can only be shared with someone the dragon recognizes as its destiny. And you can guess the horror Calix felt when he returned to his essence and saw some girl eating it. The guy thinks all this talk about fate is just idiotic, and he wasn't going to share his essence with anyone. He was very angry when he saw the girl eating that egg. He ran at the girl and said there was no way he would forgive this. How could she even do that? Currently at the manor, Calix looked at Celia's frightened face and asked, "Is she really worried about this?" The girl at this point thought that of course she was worried. She doesn't like to take care of guests. What to talk about bathing? Not only would Celia have to see him naked again, but she'd have to wash him herself. She didn't know when he would want to bathe in her blood. The girl's thoughts were suddenly interrupted by his voice. Calix said that he certainly understands that she's crazy about him, but let her be kind and pull herself together and do her duties before she gets fired. Celia wondered why it should be her, and dismissed she didn't know if he could do that. Indeed, when the girl thought that the best solution would be to run away, she told the gentleman that she would do as he said, and thought to herself that this was perfect, and she would give him the most unforgettable bath. After that, they went to his room. Calix had already taken off his clothes and was covered only with a towel. He was already ready to bathe. Celia, When she saw it, she thought how the human body could be so beautiful. She had an irresistible urge to touch it. At that moment, he threw off his towel and climbed into the warm bathtub. Celia was standing next to him, and she thought it was impossible to take her eyes off him. But she interrupted herself at those thoughts, because she couldn't think about that right now. She needed to focus on her dismissal. The girl thought, if she rubbed him haphazardly with the brush, he must get angry, right? But if she rearranges herself, she'll leave not only this manor, but also the world. Celia must be very careful in this matter. With these thoughts, the girl started rubbing it with the brush. She wondered if he liked Celia, if he wanted him to say that she was just doing a terrible job. The girl looked at him and thought that it was awful, wasn't it? She wants him to kick her out and get another maid. But suddenly, Calix turned and looked straight at her. Celia didn't expect this, so she even dropped the brush on the floor out of fright. Calix looked at her. The girl immediately crouched down and took her hands in hers, saying she would bring a new one right away. Calix smiled and told her to calm down. She was shaking like she'd never seen a man in person. Celia was very surprised when she heard it. She was the one who didn't realize when she was the one who was shaking. She was just moving the washcloth slowly so as not to make him angry. Calix turned away from the girl and told her to wash his head. Celia immediately told her master that she would do it now, but the guy, when she heard it, said Calix. The girl asked him what he meant, but he told her to call him by his name, not master. Stammering, Celia told Mr. Calix that she would do as he pleased, and thought her heart was about to burst. The girl had quite forgotten that she would have to say that name. At first she wanted to make herself chase away well, he's not so easily fooled. She's afraid she'll meet her death if the girl doesn't perform well. So Celia decided it would be best to just try harder. At this point she soaped her hands and started washing his hair, thinking that even though he scares her, Calix is very handsome. But then suddenly the girl interrupted herself at these thoughts and thought that she was looking at him too often. Without averting her gaze, she had to end it soon. After that, the girl washed the soap base out of his hair and thought she was done and she could finally escape this hell. But Calix continued to lie in the bathtub. The girl was surprised. She did not understand why he did not get up. Celia thought maybe there was something to start over again. With these thoughts, she started wiping his head again. The girl wished very much that he would stop lying down already and get up and walk away. Celia wondered if he would kill her if she woke him up, and with those thoughts she tapped his cheek and called his name. At that moment, Calix opened his eyes. He immediately got up from the bathroom and started running away without saying a word. He did it so sharply he even threw water on Celia. He asked her what she wanted. At this point, the girl thought it was actually her question, but said she was done with her hair. Calix said okay, and Celia, seeing the look on his face, didn't understand why it was so frightened. The girl then took a towel and suggested that she help him dry himself off. Calix nodded in agreement. Then Celia went over to him and started to wipe his body with a towel. But the girl didn't understand why he was blushing so much when doing this. Celia tried to calm down, thinking about the fact that he was a dragon and this could end badly. But then she caught a glimpse of his face. Calix looked very focused. He was looking somewhere in the distance. The girl immediately looked away and smiled, wondering what she had done wrong. Celia, as his personal maid, was not to be away from him for a moment. So when evening came, she was in his room. The girl stood by the window and thought that the night sky was especially beautiful, and she wanted to go home. Calix was lying on the bed at that moment, reading a book with concentration. Celia's bedtime is delayed more and more. She has to fulfill her guests' every whim, all because of that day. But then suddenly Calix turned to her and requested that the girl give him a massage. Celia approached and began to fulfill his request. The gentle movements of Celia's hands put the boy to sleep. When the girl noticed it, she smiled and thought he was just like a child. After that, she sat down next to him and watched him. Celia realized that she liked him much better asleep, and decided that she would not wake him for the time being. She had a chance to get some rest herself. After a short rest, Celia thought that she should probably wake him up already. Then she called for Mr. Calix. He immediately opened his eyes and asked how long he had slept. The girl answered that it was about 2 hours or so. Celia thought that if she'd only known he was going to start, she wouldn't have gotten a massage. She'd been told she was very good at it, but not that good. And from that day on, he started making the girl do it all the time until she fell asleep. Of course, there's nothing wrong with the massage itself. But the problem for Celia is that he goes to bed very late, usually somewhere between midnight and 1 a.m. She'd understand if Calix was working late like this or having fun with someone, but he just fundamentally doesn't want to go to bed early, and because of that, Celia can't get enough sleep. Plus, she is very tired from the day, and when he lies down in his soft bed, he tells her to get started on her massage. It's times like this that Celia starts to think about just knocking him out with his fist, no matter how beautiful he is. Everything has its limits, and one day when she was giving him a hand massage, he turned to Celia and asked, "Does she really like being with him so much?" That she blushed so much. And at that moment, the girl once again regretted eating that essence. But she always interrupted herself at such thoughts, because she should never give herself away. So she shyly apologized and said that she just liked him a lot. It was quite hard for Celia to play this important role. However, she had no choice, so she remembered all her acting skills. As Celia waited for Calix to get her massage and go to bed, she wondered if Eric was washing up at her house again today. Last night, when Celia finally returned home, it was Eric who came out to meet her. The girl asked, "Will she have to see this every day now? Hasn't he fixed his pipe yet?" The boy replied that he had told the valet, but nothing yet. Celia said she hoped he would fix it before the well went dry. But then suddenly she realized how late it was and asked, "Why is he only bathing now? Didn't he work late too?" But Eric replied that he was just waiting for her. After that, he took the girl's hand. Celia was surprised. And the guy asked, "That guy she's serving at doesn't force her to do anything, does he?" Celia asked what he meant by that, and Eric said she was hardly ever home, and a couple of times he'd almost fallen asleep while waiting for her. Eric said that if that guy suddenly makes her do unpleasant things, he will definitely try to help her. Celia was pleasantly surprised, but she thanked him and told him that it was fine, reconsidering exactly when the girl nodded. He apologized to her. Celia said it was no big deal and thanked him for inquiring, but now he'd better go and get some rest. The boy put on his shirt and wished her good night. When he left, the girl thought he was so kind and naive. If Calix was even a little bit like him, it would be very good. But while Celia was in her thoughts, she almost fell over because she fell asleep right standing up. It was all because she couldn't get any sleep. But then Calix looked at her and slammed his book shut, telling her to get started. Celia was very surprised because it was still too early. She really hoped he wouldn't ask her to massage him until midnight. Her hands were very sore and she was tired, but of course, to refuse him she cannot. So the girl went up to him and began to massage him. Sometimes at times like this, she feels like she's probing a snake because his skin is so cold and also snow white. You can tell he doesn't carry heavy weights, but it's surprising because he looks strong enough. Celia stopped herself from thinking that, wondering why she was looking at him like that. Lately, she's been feeling strangely tired when she touches him. She'd have to be careful, because if she fell asleep again, she'd get her neck snapped without even blinking an eye. As she continued to massage him, Celia was very surprised, because usually by this point he had already fallen into oblivion. But now he was just lying there looking at her. She couldn't believe that she'd actually have to massage until midnight, but then suddenly Calix told her to do that again. The girl asked again if she needed to push harder, but Calix said no. He wanted her to touch him. Celia asked where exactly. The guy put his arm around her alertly and said wherever she wanted. Celia remained silent. Then he took her hand and put it to his cheek, looking her straight in the eye. She then said she didn't know how to massage her face. Calix ignored her words and asked why her hands were so warm. Celia thought the whole problem was that her hands weren't actually warm but cold. Calix kissed her hand and said it was unpleasant to touch her. When Celia wanted to say something to him, he immediately interrupted and told her to try again, to touch him again. Celia thought at this point that this was going beyond all the limits of a massage. And besides, he had it plainly written on his face that he would kill her after the first touch. But ignore all your thoughts. Celia ran her finger along his chin. But it happened very quickly, and she pulled her hand away immediately. After that, she asked if that was enough. Calix pulled her close and told her that even if she gave it a chance, it would be good too. Celia didn't understand why he could be attractive, even though holding her like this made her heart jump out of her chest. Of course she doesn't hate him, but she's not in such a bad mood either. She was comfortable, as if they were one and the same. Calix said after a while, lest she misunderstand him. Her body would be nice someday, but love was completely different. He also said that nothing good would come of it. and there was no need for these vain expectations. Celia thought that this was the way it should be, and they lay down on the bed together. The guy put his arm around her, and they lay like that. The girl thought at that moment that she was not crazy, but who knows what was good. After that moment, nothing like that ever happened again. The massage just continued. In other words, the girl's blood even poured, tired anytime she just collapsed and slept. Celia slept even while eating. The girl thought that at this rate she would really just die from the overload. One night, Calix, as usual, told her to start. The girl came over and started massaging his hands, as was her habit. After that, she moved on to his body and face. But then suddenly, after a while, she noticed that he had already fallen asleep. Celia was glad, thinking that finally she too would be able to sleep. But when she was about to leave, she couldn't because Calix wouldn't let go of her hand. Celia thought she should go home and rest already, just a little bit. But she felt her eyes getting heavier and heavier, and eventually she collapsed next to him on the bed and fell asleep. Sometimes a girl feels disappointed in herself. For example, her body is fresh in the morning and the sunlight makes the house very warm. She had been sleeping and even getting enough sleep. But now the situation was more serious. For one thing, it's the fact that she's in someone else's room. But the worst part for her is that Calix has his arms around her in such a way that she can't get out. Celia lay like that from exhaustion, sleeping from the evening until the morning, and when she woke up in the morning, she thought she had to get out of his arms somehow. But suddenly she heard someone knocking on the door and was about to enter. Then Celia realized that there was no point in getting out, and she had to pretend to be asleep. So she lay back on the bed. A second later, Roman entered the room. He turned to Mr. Calix and said that he had brought him the offerings from the elders. Calix, hearing this, started to wake up and sat up on the bed, not noticing the girl next to him. Roman asked him in surprise if everything was okay. At that moment, the boy looked at the side of the bed next to him and asked what it was. Calix asked, "Did he really sleep with that now?" All the while he looked at the girl who lay next to him. After thinking for a bit, he shouted furiously for the girl to get up immediately. For dragons, sharing the essence with someone is the same as taking a loyalty oath. At the same time, when a dragon shares it, its soul and body become very unstable. There are two ways to overcome this period. The first is to become one with your partner, and the second is to touch them. With Calix, both of these options are impossible, which is why he's in an unstable state all the time. The most common sign of this is precisely insomnia. So of course his rapid awakening became understandable. Calix, when the girl didn't hear him the first time, yelled for her to get up immediately. After that, yanked, just not in such a way that Celia fell to the floor. The girl immediately began to apologize to him, and thought to herself that all was lost. Now she was really going to die. Calix calmed down a bit, and said that as much as he liked her a lot, he wouldn't let her sleep in the same bed with him. The situation angered him. Roman and the girl, when they heard that, they were shocked that he said such a thing, but Celia once again apologized to him, saying that she dare not desire a place near him. But she doesn't really think that's the case. Anyway, Celia didn't want to sleep next to him. Under normal circumstances, Calix would have immediately gotten very angry. But Roman didn't understand what was wrong. Why was he acting differently? But then he suddenly thought, is this really about the girl? Of course, that was just his guess. So Roman turned to the gentleman and said that he had something for him. Calix became indignant and asked his assistant, "Can't he see he's busy right now?" Roman wondered, and wondered what he was busy with, since it was about his condition. Calix, when he heard this, told the girl to get out, but he didn't even have time to finish his sentence. Celia ran to the door and said that yes, she'd better go. As the door slammed shut, Calix asked, "And what was it about?" Roman explained that the oldest dragons were worried about his condition. Roman said that's why they had gifts for him and asked how about sending them a letter in return. Calix was surprised that the man had come just to tell it, but said okay and waved his hand. Roman then asked what had happened to that girl. Calix replied that he had nothing to worry about because he had only left her because she was good at massages. He added that she wasn't the problem at all, but then the North kid. He had to go through a lot because of that girl. Then Calix, in an angry voice, told his assistant to catch her already. But then all of a sudden the guy felt some strange feeling. He thinks he has done something shameful, but he doesn't understand why he thinks Celia is concerned about the massage. At that moment he wondered, Would he still have a chance to sleep tonight even for an hour? And the greatest happiness for a girl is that she can look at him. It was nearing D-Day when the Chamberlain came to Calix and told him that this time the Count had sent Mr. Calix a skakun, a racehorse that was bred in Grothera Island. Some even say that Count Praff is only 3 of them, this one with one of the biggest and strongest. But Calix hardly listened to him. He thought he was too loud. Maybe he should just take it and break his neck. The Chamberlain asked how he would like the idea. He could take and walk around the village to look around. Calix, when he heard that, thought about the walk. Thanks to the girl, his insomnia was gone lately. The boy thought that in that case he could go out for a walk in a good mood. And as a nice bonus, the Chamberlain would be quiet by now. So Calix decided to go out for a walk after all. As he passed the fields, he noticed a girl. Looking at Celia, he was surprised at this atmosphere because he thought she was resting while she wasn't visiting him. Calix. Yes, I was nearby and watched the girl working hard, sharpening tools, pulling a heavy cart with a load. He marveled at the fact that she did this work every day and agonized so much. But then suddenly, while Celia was carrying another box of corn, she accidentally hurt her hand. Calix felt some pain as well, but a Chamberlain came up to him and asked the Lord if there might be something wrong. Why is his face like that? Calix felt a sharp pain in his heart, but it was strange. The boy wondered if it might be another side effect after losing the essence. But at that moment, Celia, who was still carrying the box, accidentally tripped and fell, dropping all the corn. Calix just stood there watching her. Well, you suddenly started moving towards the girl. When the Chamberlain noticed this, he asked the gentleman, "Where is he going?" Well, the guy didn't listen to him. He walked over to the girl, took off his cloak, and threw it over her shoulders. Celia was surprised. She didn't understand why he did that. Calix asked, "Has she really been touching him with dirty hands all this time?" "She always washes them properly, so that not even a speck of dust is left behind." Calix ignored her answer and asked if he could clean all that dirt quickly. Afterward, he said that most people who love him, then they are deeply mistaken, and he hopes she will be special. Calix said that in his eyes, all his female fans are the same, so he hopes she won't be the same. Celia looked at him and he said that just because he was leaving her around, don't let her delude herself into thinking she had a lot of free time. Celia still didn't understand what was going on, but she agreed with the Lord. Then the man turned around, walking away, telling her to go and wash up quickly. He then turned around and told her not to enter his bedroom under any circumstances until he called for her. Celia was in shock. She covered her face with his cloak so he wouldn't see her tears. At that moment, Calix thought he certainly didn't want to look at her crying. Before he left, he told the girl to pray that his anger would cool down. Celia covered her face with her hands and said to the master, "All right." She smiled and thought it was such an unexpected generosity. She wouldn't pray for anything. Celia figured he wouldn't do anything near the temple and rejoiced, thinking she could finally get some sleep. 4 days later, Calix was in his office. They were arguing with Roman. The Black Dragon said, "Really, it doesn't make sense. No matter how formal the letter is, you can't start it with swearing." Calix clutched the piece of paper on which he had written the swear word, and said that it had been 4 whole days since that green-haired woman had been in his bedroom. The guy was angry that it had been 4 whole days already, but Roman was surprised and asked, "Wasn't that his order?" Calix thought about it and said that in principle it makes sense. The girl is in love after all, so she acts quietly enough. Calix, after thinking it over, thought that this was how she was most likely to start hating him after all. Maybe she couldn't come. But the guy wondered if it was more likely that the fact that he'd forbidden her to see him was too harsh, as if the world might disappear because of it. Roman thought for a moment and said that if she wasn't so worried, he must really like the girl. Calix sighed and said that it wasn't the girl he liked. It was the way she gave massages. Besides, he would be the head of the middle world, and it would be nice to show mercy to people. So he told Roman to bring that caterpillar to him. The boy went out the door following his orders. Calix was the one with the power. He was the one who squealed from pushing himself on others. And then suddenly he decided to show mercy. Roman thought maybe it was because he had lost his essence. And if that was what this was all about, then he needed to find the northern man who was responsible for the theft sooner rather than later. When Celia was having dinner, a maid came up to them and said that Mr. Calix was calling for her. The girl was surprised, but told the maid that if it was right now, she would go. The maid immediately stopped her and said that she should at least clean herself up a little first. Celia sighed and said that she had just finished work after all. But the maid at that moment placed a clean garment on a chair, and the girl, when she saw it, asked what it was. But the girl, as she left, told Celia to just wash herself now and wash off all the dirt. And after that, change into the clothes she had given her. After that, Celia must go up to the second floor of the Yeonju fortress. Celia was terrified, because that's also where Calix-san's room is. But the girl didn't understand why she had to go there. After all, she hadn't been there for only a few days. The girl was terrified. She didn't understand why he was calling her, but she had no choice. So, after washing all the dirt off well and changing her clothes, she came to his room and asked if he had summoned her. Calix smiled when he saw her and asked if she had been thinking for a long time. Celia replied that of course she had for a long time. She was just wondering what else she could do for him. Calix told the girl that he liked to hear that, and she could come to him again today. Celia heard this and sighed unhappily. But then, seeing his stern expression, she immediately smiled and thanked him. Calix suddenly took the girl's hands and placed her in his lap, telling her to know for the future that as soon as he opened his eyes in the morning, she should already be there. Celia was shocked. She didn't understand why she had to do all this, but she answered him well. Calix said he went out for a walk and the scenery wasn't bad, so he thought he'd walk some more while it was sunny. Celia thought, does he say this because he wants her to accompany him on his walk? But answered him that before he went, she had something she wanted to say. When he needed help, he could call out to her and she would come running right away. Calix became indignant and asked, does he really have to wait for her to come? The girl asked, does that mean she has to be in his room every morning at 7 o'clock then? Calix said it was exactly like that. At that moment, the girl thought that compared to what she had to do before, this was much easier. So basically, she was glad. But still, she wasn't happy about having to spend time with this crazy dragon all day. There was nothing worse than that. But then suddenly, while she was thinking all this, Calix laid his head on her shoulder. The girl was surprised and called out to him. But when she looked up, she saw that he was asleep. Celia was shocked at how he had fallen asleep so easily while she was sitting on his lap. It had been a week since her workplace had become Calix's bedroom instead of the field. At this point, the girl's life has become much more comfortable than it was. She no longer has to cater to people who look like Jade. All she has to do is just massage. But Celia still didn't understand what it was she was thinking when she confessed her love to him. But still, the best part was that she could eat normally 3 times a day. Walking beside Calix once again, the girl thought that the fact that she was comfortable around a dragon that wanted to kill her was ironic enough. She forgot for a moment that happiness does not last long, and that misfortune always comes suddenly. Suddenly, while they were walking, they heard a whistling sound. Then they looked up at the sky and saw a black spot. In just a second, a lot of mud had settled on Calix's head and was dripping down onto his clothes. Celia was horrified. She didn't know what she should do. But then, suddenly a girl ran up to them. It was Rowena. She got down on her knees and started apologizing to the Lord. She said that she didn't even think the mud would fly in his direction. Celia noticed Calix starting to get angry. On such occasions, she had already invented a project to reduce his anger. The first step in this list is praise. The girl told the gentleman that his beauty is dazzling, even though he is soiled with dirt. But that didn't work, and he continued to be angry. Then the second step is to take him somewhere away from the place of irritation. Celia said she thought he should wash first because his delicate skin might be affected. But that answer was also a mistake. Celia was terrified. She was very scared because this might not end well. Suddenly, the girl saw Calix start to approach the kneeling girl. That's when Celia realized she had to proceed to step 3. She ran up to him, grabbed him by the waist, and told him to forgive her for the first time. The third step is to beg for mercy. The girl, with tears in her eyes, said, "Didn't he say he would be lenient with people?" Celia said her house was very close by. They would be there in less than 5 minutes, and she asked how about taking a bath at her place. Calix stopped, looked at the girl, and told her in an angry voice to lead the way. Celia rejoiced and said that was right. He wasn't far away. The girl had succeeded in saving her friend Rowena, so she was glad, and after a while through the forest they reached the hut. Calix, when he saw it, asked the girl, "Is this a cow house?" Celia thought that it wasn't actually any barn, but her house. I actually have no desire for it to be there either, but there's no choice, she said. The girl said that if he didn't like it that much, maybe he wanted to go back to the mansion. But Calix didn't say anything back. He just started walking into the house. Celia came in behind him and the man asked, "Where is her bathtub located?" wiping the dirt off with a towel. The girl was surprised and said she had no bathroom and also no hot water. Calix was shocked, but Celia said that her friend Eric was sitting without water in the house at all, so compared to him she wasn't quite so bad yet. Calix had nothing to do when he finished wiping the dirt from his face. Celia told him to take off his clothes. As Calix began to undress, the girl got some strange feeling. Celia thought, "Is she going crazy?" The girl didn't understand how he could look so handsome even when covered in dirt. Then suddenly their gazes met, but they quickly averted them from each other. This isn't the first time Celia has seen him without clothes, of course, but it's still so awkward for her. Then she told him she would wait outside, so if he needed anything, let him call out. Celia said it would be better if she came out, but she didn't understand. It was strange to her that she felt different somehow. There was a fluttering in her stomach. Let them for a while, she walked back in and saw that Calix had just finished bathing and was coming out of the bathroom. Celia laughed a little, but quickly told him to go to the bedroom because she had put a clean blanket for him there. Calix said thanks enough for that. The girl replied that she would wash his clothes right away and hang them up to dry. When she carried his clothes to wash them, she noticed that they were dirty too. "So, we need to wash everything together so that we don't have to do double work." So Celia took a shower and dumped all her dirty clothes into the barrel to take care of later. As the water poured over her body, Celia began to remember all the times she had been close to Calix. But she interrupted herself because she can't be distracted, and she needs to finish quickly, or this could be a problem. After that, she hung all her clothes outside to dry. Then she put on dry clothes and knocked on the door to Calix's room. When he undressed and decided to enter, Celia said she had washed everything, but the clothes were still drying, and thought to herself, why should she knock, going into her own room? But when she said that, she looked at him and was surprised because he was calm. Celia thought that normally Calix would have gotten mad at the girl and said that she had left him in such a filthy place, and even stayed late, so he would rip her throat out. But it was different now. He was even kind of sad. Celia continued to stare at him, but she still didn't understand why her heart was pounding so frantically. She thought maybe she'd talked about love too often, so she believed her own words, and at that moment, she started pounding her chest. Calix, when she saw it, asked what she was doing. The girl was frightened and replied that it was nothing like that. After that, she said that the clothes wouldn't be dry for a while yet, and suggested that maybe she could give him a massage and he could get some sleep. Calix looked at her for a bit and hesitated, then snapped her fingers, which meant she could begin. Then he lay down, and the girl came up to begin her work. Of course, under normal circumstances, Celia would sit on a chair, but she doesn't have that luxury at home, so she has to sit next to him. She continued to massage him and thought that them being together wasn't so bad. But then suddenly, without thinking, she started to massage his ear. Calix was shocked. He immediately took her hand and pulled her away. Ask her what she was doing. Celia was shocked. She herself did not understand why it suddenly began to touch his ears. The girl thought, I urgently need to answer something. She thought about maybe saying that his ears were really nice, so her hand slipped off accidentally. But then she realized that was silly, and Calix was just looking at her in the meantime. But then he took her hand and flipped her over to where he'd just been. Celia didn't know what was going on, but he, after looking at her gently for a while, began kissing her neck. After that, Calix began to spread his hands and pry into forbidden places with them. Celia didn't understand how that could happen. She shivered and only thought about how she shouldn't do that. Calix, stopping, told her to push him away if she didn't like it. Celia thought at that moment that, of course she didn't like it, because he's a dragon that wants to rip out and eat her heart. But still she feels something. So the girl took and wrapped her arms around his neck. Calix smiled smugly and said he wouldn't resist one himself. Mornings aren't always fresh. Mornings can be hard because you have to get out from under a cozy blanket to get back to work. And the morning after that night at Celia's was just like that. When she woke up, she sat up on the bed. The girl felt pain all over her body. Celia didn't understand what was wrong, but then she turned around and noticed that she wasn't alone in the room. Calix was sitting in the chair next to her, and Roman was standing next to her. Black Dragon exhaled and told the master that when he brought this man, he thought it was another corpse. Calix was surprised and wondered why she would have come to him with a corpse in his arms. He'd just dump her on the way out and that would be it. Celia was in shock. She didn't understand what was even going on, where her bed was, why she was in that place. Roman continued to talk. He said that wasn't like him at all and asked if Calix wasn't going to kill her. Celia was very surprised to hear that and thought, why would she kill her? But Calix laughed and asked what he was doing it for. But Roman asked again if he really wouldn't kill. Calix said yes, and tell him to stop saying that already. Celia was horrified. She didn't understand what they were talking about at all. The girl hoped they were telling her about her murder, but Roman didn't stop. He wondered if there was some other reason since he was usually adamant about that. Calix got angry and asked what that was saying. The Black Dragon immediately laughed nervously and said that of course he didn't kill people. He seemed to have something mixed up in his head. Celia heard that and thought it was a blatant lie. She knew Calix was crazy, but she didn't think he killed people so easily. Roman looked at the girl and asked then why he had brought this man into the room. Calix replied that he just felt like it. Celia didn't know what had happened at all, but she was very scared. But suddenly Calix asked Roman to come out. The boy was surprised and said that he hadn't given him the letter for the elders yet. Calix replied that he should write and send it himself, but Roman resented it and said that the handwriting would be different. Calix just looked at him. Roman was startled. Afterward, he took the cup from him and said he understood. As the door closed, Calix began to look at the girl who was sitting on the bed. Celia didn't understand why he was looking at her like that, but at that moment, the guy got up from his chair. The girl got even more nervous. She didn't understand why he decided to approach. If he wouldn't kill her, maybe he wanted to cut off her arms or legs. Calix sat down next to her and asked if he was so good that she was so worried. Celia was more surprised than ever when she heard that. The girl thought that since yesterday her heart had been beating furiously with fear, and he was deeply mistaken if he thought it was just excitement. At that moment, Calix took the girl by the hair and saw the wounds on her neck. At that moment, the guy thought he had some strange feeling. He was embracing this woman with hair the color of a caterpillar. What's more, it was the first time he'd ever been so horny. He'd never lusted for anyone as much as he did for her. He looked at Celia and thought he felt all these feelings for this girl. It's strange to him that when he's around her, passion and greed mingling in him, feeling so disorderly. Suddenly he said that she could rest in his room tonight. When Celia heard this, she said that no way, it was impossible. She thought she was crazy to stay there. Calix started to leave, and the girl wanted to get out of bed too. But then she suddenly felt a sharp pain in her stomach. Calix turned to her and said that she had not even tried a second time. The guy thought it would be necessary to establish a distance, but if it goes on like this, the girl will suffer and think that he was just playing with her and doesn't really love her. Calix thought that this misunderstanding was going to cost him a lot. Suddenly, as he was about to leave, a girl approached him. She asked if he could give her something, at least a blanket or a laundry basket. Calix was surprised and asked what for. Celia explained that she wanted to go to the bathroom, but she was a little embarrassed to go out like this. Calix, hearing this, smiled. He then took his pants from the rack, walked over to her, and began to put them on for her. The girl was embarrassed and said in a nervous voice that he was just borrowing. She could dress herself. Calix looked at her face and wondered if she thought he would do such a thing twice. Let her just be still, but don't misunderstand him either. Celia gave up. She just sat there and waited for it to be over, thinking for sure there would be no more misunderstandings. Calix thought throughout the day that he was in an unusually good mood. He suggested that perhaps it was because he was watching Celia in ridiculously baggy clothes. Besides, the girl had had a good lunch earlier. Roman passed him a letter from the elders, and he told Calix to write a letter back. The guy figured since he had nothing better to do right now, he might as well think of something to write. When he called Roman, the boy said that he was very glad that the Lord had decided to take care of it, and also that Calix had chosen the paper for the letter. The Lord, when he looked at the table, wondered why there were so many pieces of paper. Roman explained that he was just in a hurry, so he had brought everything. But then suddenly Calix noticed some envelope that was on the table, and asked Roman, had the elders sent him a letter? The boy was surprised and said that no letter had arrived. Calix decided to print out the letter. After that, they read it. It said that it was a lucky letter, forward it 7 times. Then they would get their 100% share of happiness. Otherwise they would be cursed, and they should hurry, because there were only 4 days left. Roman, when he saw all this, was shocked. He didn't understand what kind of lunatic had done it. Then he turned to the gentleman and said that he would surely find the criminal who had sent this letter, and asked how on earth the man had dared to send him such a thing. Calix said that he'd brought it himself, hadn't he? Roman got upset and replied that he hadn't written it, but the guy replied that it didn't matter, so just let him bring the ink. With those words he tossed the sheet aside. Roman replied that of course he would prepare everything now. He thought to himself that it was fortunate that he wasn't interested in that awful letter. After that, the Black Dragon brought everything he needed. He stood beside Calix and told him to be sure to write specifically to the elders. Calix said he was obsessed with names, just as he had been before, and that at that moment, when Calix was about to start writing, ink was accidentally spilled on her. The maid who was pouring the tea apologized to the gentleman and said that it was accidental, and the ink continued to spill over the table. Roman became worried. He asked if the gentleman was all right, and added that he would wash his hands now. At that moment, Celia, who was lying on the couch, woke up and looked out from under the blanket. She didn't realize what had happened. The girl saw nothing as she rested under a blanket after dinner. The maid, who had accidentally knocked over the ink, thought only that she was about to die, and Roman was very angry. He thought he was going to kill her and repeated that phrase over and over in his head. But Calix ignored the situation when he saw Celia turn to her and say that she must be hungry by now. Everyone was shocked. Calix wondered what to do, but he remembered that dinner was coming soon and asked that the maid prepare it. The maid got very excited and said that was right. She would do it right away. Roman was shocked. He didn't understand who he was or why Calix was so kind. The maid immediately began setting the table, and Calix, while changing her shirt, told them that when they were done, to let them leave. Roman was surprised and asked if he was really letting them go even without punishment. Calix looked at Celia at this point and said that it was just that the caterpillar was very timid. Roman was in shock. He didn't understand what was going on at all. When everyone was done and out of the room, Calix walked over to where Celia was hiding, pulled the blanket off of her and told her to go to dinner with him already. Roman thought maybe the lack of essence was making his head foggy. Calix and Celia then sat down at the table and began their meal. They sat in silence. Roman thought at this point that so-and-so would remind the gentleman of the letter after they were done. He then turned to the maid and told her to clear the table. The girl immediately went and started to clean everything up, but then she suddenly noticed some piece of paper on the table. She couldn't read, so she didn't understand what it was about. The girl thought it was something important, and decided it was something that shouldn't be thrown away. It was the same piece of paper that the guys had read earlier. When evening came, Celia decided to go back to her house. Along with her went the maid. When the girl came to the place, she stopped because she was surprised. The maid told her not to be surprised. Celia was indignant and asked how she could not be surprised, for it was her house. It wasn't even half a day before he just took it and collapsed. Celia was very angry. She pointed to the maid at the ruins that remained of her house. The maid said he was too unfit to live, as if he were cattle. These words hurt Celia's heart. She thought that of course when it rained she'd shiver in it from the cold. And this house was only good for sleeping in. Even the ghosts had run from it, but nevertheless it was precious to her. She had gotten it for her hard work over the years. The maid said that Mr. Calix said he didn't want to see him anymore. Celia, hearing this, became angry. She wasn't crying anymore. She thought that she should kill the creep. She really wants him to be struck by lightning. You can't behave like that. Suddenly, the maid interrupted her and told her to calm down and just follow her. After that, they walked to the deep forest together. As they passed by, Celia thought the scenery was just magical. She wondered if maybe it was because they were away from the village. But then suddenly the maid stopped. She turned to the girl and said that she would now live there. Celia was surprised and asked if it was in that vacant lot. "Where is the house?"